Welcome back. Today, we will discuss an interesting and slightly heavy topic. In summary, it is the fear under the gaze of death. Generally speaking, no matter what kind of fear, there is a landscape that it forms in out of the subconscious mind, an image that can be easily understood by us after being concretized. Because we are all very familiar with the image brought by this concretized landscape. How familiar are we? It is so familiar that it has become a matter of course in life, just like the multiplication formula. It often appears as a ghost. Ghosts, such supernatural, strange and mysterious creatures, are more often called the superstitious unknowns at present. The archetypal representation of fear that exists subconsciously. It is actually the most direct landscape of fear we can grasp. Ghosts disturbs us not only because they are mysterious, but because they are too familiar at the same time. From the world of living, they appear as outsiders. But from the world of dead, they seem to carry human attributes, residues of what we are, what we will become. Ghosts are merely superstitions, archetypal and symbol of death. They are the most accessible image of death we hold, and more often the first ones we encounter in our life. An imagined form that hovers at the edge of rationality and bizarreness, yet still carrying within a small portion of human attributes. It is there that our fear becomes visible, and it is only then do we truly grasp the feeling of death. It can be said that the most of the horror products on the market today that revolve around ghosts, such as movies, TV series, and even novels, are almost all based on the construction fear landscape we talked about to show the fantasy. We don't need to think about it. We can feel and even understand where the source of horror image of a culture product with the ghosts is. So who built this horror landscape and why did they build it? To answer these questions, here is a short story to share with you. One morning, a little boy was in school. For a primary school student who had just entered the first grade, there aren't as much schoolwork. Therefore, the teacher was quite tolerant of the children's wandering and truancy. The little boy was distracted at this moment, but when he's wandering, a man's face suddenly appeared on the glass window outside the classroom, which really scared him. Soon he recognized that the man was his father. His father suddenly came to the school and told him something strange. The grandfather who doted on him was both a teacher and a friend and was highly respected by him, suddenly passed away. The boy of his age does not have a clear concept of the word death. For him, death is neither the result of extinction nor the process of disappearance. Strangely for him, who has taken from school to the hospital building, the death he could recognize was an atmosphere and shift of environment. There was obviously a person lying in the bed in the ward, but his face could not be seen, and a layered white cloth covered the body. Someone told the boy that the person under the white cloth was his grandfather, but the boy didn't understand. He did not and could not admit that the person lying motionless on the bed covered with a white cloth, such a strange, unrecognized person, would be his grandfather. He felt as if everyone on this day was out of character, and a depressing atmosphere lingered on every familiar face he met. It felt like he was the stranger, because he was the only one acting as he normally would. It seemed that this day was the opposite of every other day. And it seemed that the world on this day was special compared to the world on any other day. Even his father, who was usually lively, was unusual, but he still smiled. When his father put a wet towel under the white cloth, Wiping it back and forth, he muttered to himself, "Dad, you are still warm. How come you are gone all of a sudden?" All these seemed incomprehensible to the boy. The boy thought everyone was crazy and he didn't understand what happened. This madness lasted until a few days later, until he stood in front of the memorial hall of the funeral, and he really saw Death for the first time. Death that day wore a black coat. This death made him so cowardly terrified that he dared not to step into the hole. This death made him unable to look directly into the eyes of his grandfather, who always looked up to him with a smile, because he realized what death would be. He felt an indescribable fear, one that haunts him every day. It wasn't absence or departure that frightened him, it was transformation, that someone so full could become so silent in the midst of a few days, that life could continue without asking permission. In this story, the boy experienced the gradual formation of a fear landscape, which we can summarize as a trilogy composed of crazy, rituals, and extinction. We can immediately understand one thing from this, that a person's death can be observed as a rational fact by those who are not involved. But for those who are involved, the whole process of death construction is a crazy process, an absolutely irrational process. Well, we can understand it as a process of grief, mourning, or recollection. Just like the father in the story muttering when wiping the body of his departed relative. Reason cannot explain why a living person could speak to a dead person. The ritual explained the reasonable behavior of this crazy process. Of course, the process in this ritual is extrinsically crazy. Extinction is the core of the whole death process and the biggest reason why the boy felt that fear. Rituals are not logical, but they allow us to act as if life is still ordered, that our life is still in control. In doing so, they protect us from madness, and yet their madness themselves formalized, softened, performed in daylight. In an impractical place, he was reminded that he had to say goodbye to a dead person on a specific occasion. Then it means that he is still here. The landscape of fear was born in death again and again. But this still cannot explain why, as human beings, we have to use ritual behavior to assist it and complete this landscape of fear. There's a popular saying. He said that it is because people want to fight death and want to exist forever after death. This is a crazy and romantic saying, but it is not enough to answer our doubts. At least rationality doesn't allow humans to put themselves on the cliff of a beast of madness. It is very interesting that it is precisely because of this that rationality does not allow humans to put themselves on the cliff of madness. At the edge of rational thought and explanation lies a fence. Beyond it, the terrain of madness began. But rationality doesn't retreat. It holds its firm ground in the human mind. Only when incomprehensible moments occur do ration compromise with madness. These are not exceptions to reason. They are its boundaries. These boundaries must exist, acting as a self-protecting mechanism from the craziness of the world. Fear, especially the fear of death, is policed not by logic, but by the internalized surveillance of culture. Like Foucault's panopticon, we behave as if death watches us, though no one needs to tell us so. Its gaze is already within us, and will always be within us. This is called rationality compromised with madness. In almost all theoretical courses, whether it's sociology, philosophy, literature, or even psychology or art, almost all professors would talk about the concepts of these subjects in the introduction. Without exception, all lecturers will mention remembrance and reflection. Remembrance is the sensibility that makes us get to the bottom of a thing, while reflection is the way to unravel the problems brought about by internal things and reach their essence. On the issue of remembrance and reflection, there is a commonplace that is often used as the explanation. For example, the question is very simple when it is asked in the form of rhetorical questions, which is a series of questions related to morality and loyalty. For example, do you think that two people who love each other and want to stay together for their life can get married? You can type in the comment. I guess most people should think that two people who love each other can definitely get married. It is both reasonable and legal in terms of reason and logic. Then remembrance and reflection appear. What if the two people who love each other are two men or two women? That is, between the same sex. Can they get married? Then what if there are two cats who love each other? Can they get married? Then what if there are three people who love each other? 300 people? 3,000 people? Can they get married? We will find that under the influence of remembrance and reflection, we will raise or lower the problem endlessly until we reach a place that we may never able to touch, a place where our rationality could not comprehend. That is, the field that we cannot understand with our current human cognition. That is, the area the human rationality cannot explore with interference or thinking. For example, a person falls in love with a stone. A sheep falls in love with a human. How to prove for the stone will say yes? How can I judge the freedom of decision of the sheep? And how to deny the love of a human for the sheep? Therefore, scholars have drawn and found the rational boundary line. At the other end of this boundary line, irrationality stands. That is, only madness breeds, prospers. The fear landscape we just talked about and the fear under the gaze of death we talked about today appear at the other end of the rational boundary line, firmly controlled by irrationality. Therefore, in order to control madness, humans can only temporarily use a non-pure rationality to subdue it. Thus, ritual behaviors was born, religion was born, and above them was irrational belief. Just like what we said, rationality does not allow humans to put themselves on the edge of the boundary of madness, to compromise with madness instead. It is worth noting that the story we just mentioned is only one of the few ways death reflects its energy. In fact, the fear brought by death and the surveillance projected by that fear are almost everywhere. And it is not only ghosts that can make us feel that fear. Everything is precisely because death is staring at us all the time. Every minute and every second of our existence is also a process of disappearing, in which death is slowly depriving us of our lives. In other words, each of us is constantly circulating and experiencing the last stage of the trilogy in the case of the little boy. This is a seemingly rational and ordinary life, yet it paralyzes our ability to perceive the existence of death. Because if our rational mind did so, we would lose the motivation to continue living. Then everyone would turn to nihilism, everyone will realize the meaninglessness of life. Thus, the human race will fall into extinction. However, sometimes some unique feelings are accompanied by the glimpse of death, making us sober or crazy, and eliciting the weight of death itself and the fear it carries. Confusion is the strongest feeling among them, just like the whole process the little boy in the vision experienced when his grandfather died. Rationality can also choose to avoid death itself and describe the state of the little boy as confusion. For example, sometimes we start to be confused about our past or the future on a certain day, as if on that day we were out of character and a depressing atmosphere lingered on every familiar face we met. That day seemed like the opposite of every other day. It seemed that the world on that day was peculiar compared to the world on any other day, so that we began to mutter to ourselves, warn ourselves, mourn for the past, and judge the future. We rely on the destined result, the shoulders of death, irrationality and bizarreness, allowing weird thoughts and assumed facts to spread in our minds. We felt a fear that came from death but was not immediately recognized by us, a fear that we were already dead. Because if we have already dead, it will show a terrible fact. We want to say goodbye to our dead selves, but we're still sitting here. Just like whether we believe in ghosts, we are born to know the meaning of ghosts and sense the fear they bring. Because under this crazy shadow of death, the huge surveillance of fear has been hovering in our dreams since that day we came to this earth. The hunter who accompanies us throughout our lives. Only then will you grasp the feeling of death through those unique emotions and traits. Okay, our video today ends here. Thank you for listening and watching. See you next time. Bye.